Well, a big welcome to everybody on this rather damp and miserable Wednesday evening in Cornwall anyway. Perfect evening to sit in and listen to some good conversation, which I'm sure we're going to have. My name's Richard. I am a director and a trustee of Emmaus Cornwall, and it is my really great privilege to be the host and the compere for this evening's event. This is the latest in the line of Emmaus conversations that we've held, where we talk to authors who kindly give up their time completely free to help raise money and awareness about both Emmaus in general and Emmaus Cornwall in particular. Most of you will be aware, but some may not, so I'll just mention that Emmaus is a homelessness charity which seeks to provide homeless people with a home for as long as they want or need it, and also with work. The term we use for homeless people that we help are companions, and they live in what we call an Emmaus community. And this is our ambition as Emmaus Cornwall, to establish a community as soon as we can. So a big thank you to everybody who's tuned in tonight for supporting us with your time and money. Every little helps, as Tesco once said, to help bring that vision to life. So thanks very much indeed for joining, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy our evening together. Normally, for these conversations, we have one author, but tonight we have two for the price of one. Not only that, not only do we have two authors, but we have two authors who have had long and illustrious acting careers. So we have a lot to talk about in our hour together. And you can join in. If you want to put a question either to Liz or Norman, please do put a question in the question and answer chat box, and I will put that to them towards the end of the hour as we move on. So, on behalf of you all, can I give a very warm Emmaus Cornwall welcome and thanks to Liz Revill and Norman Eshley. Thank you very much, the pair of you, for joining in this evening. The structure we're going to do, because it is slightly unusual with two authors, is I'm going to talk first of all to Liz about her acting career, and then to Norman about his, and then we'll bring them together and we'll talk about their collaboration in this excellent book, which if you haven't already read, you must certainly get hold of as soon as possible. The Dreamtime of the Artful Dodger. We'll talk about that in some depth a little bit later. So if that's all right, Liz, if I can start with you, and welcome. Where do you join us from tonight?
Oh, I'm in North Devon tonight, at home on the farm.
Excellent. But you have Cornwall links, don't you?
Yes, I do. My grandfather was Cornish. He left Wales to go down the tin mines when the coal ran out there, and or rather, the other way around. He left Cornwall when the tin mines went to go to Wales. And right. So there are family from the Cornish side as well. And of course, I have a second home there, and I've just been hearing that they're thinking of raising our council tax and tripling it, which is not good. But we are intending to retire down there.
Oh, excellent. Well, we look forward to having you full time and not just part time. So just reflecting on your career, so obviously you became an actress many years ago now. So the obvious question, I guess, was it something that you had a long cherished ambition for, or was it something that you sort of fell into, or maybe somewhere in between?
Something that I always wanted to do. I remember horrifying my mother's friends who were around to tea when I was 3 years old. And the one lady said, "And what do you want to do, Elizabeth?" And I thought, and I said, "A saloon girl," because I'd seen the cowboy films with the girls with the feathers in their hair and pretty dresses and looking wonderful, and they were all absolutely horrified. Right. But anyway, I didn't become a saloon girl, but my father was extremely wise. He thought that I should have something behind me first. So I finished all my education. I did my A-levels, I went off to college, I trained to teach, and I did my probationary year. And I said to my father when I got back, I said, "Right, I've done what you want me to do, now I want to do what I want to do." And he said, "Well, let's see if you get in first." So I applied to 3 drama schools, and I got in at all 3. And so then it was a matter of which I could afford. And I'd saved some money up to get my first term's fees together. But if I went to the one in Birmingham, which was one of the 12 members of court, I could live at home and mum and dad would look after me and see me through my career. And then they said to me, Well, we'll see you in your first play, which would be in the second year, the beginning of the second year, and then we'll let you know if you can stay on. He saw me in the first play and he said, yes, you can stay on. So that's what I did. And I was very fortunate. I won the Carlton Hobbs Award and had a contract with BBC Radio, and I joined their radio rep. And as a result, I worked extensively in radio, and I also worked extensively in theatre. I was what you call a good jobbing actress who went from job to job. And I was very lucky. I wasn't out of work hardly at all, a couple of weeks at a time. So it worked very well for me. But then a family came along and I had to give all that up. And so Dad's wise words paid off, because he then said, right, you know, you can go back to teaching while you're bringing up your son, which is exactly what I did. My ex-husband and I, we moved around. He was the exceptionally good actor, Douglas Fielding, who was also very well known at the time. So he took the major role in that, and I went back to teaching to pay the mortgage.
Yeah. Now I'll take you back a step, because you very modestly mentioned the Carlton Hobbs Award, which is perhaps an award that people haven't heard of. So, you know, just explain a little bit about that, and how important was that in terms of developing your career?
Well, it was. Because the Carlton Hobbs Award, it's a competition held by the BBC for the most promising student actress and actor in voice work and radio. And it hadn't been won by a female for 3 years when I came along, but I had a wonderful director in radio called George Woolley, bless his heart, who saw something in me. And he spent a lot of time with me. He would give up lunchtimes and say, come on into the studio and let's work on this and let's work on that. And took a stand when the students were being selected to go in for this competition, because each drama school sent 6 students. And he said to the principal at the time, who said, well, she's always getting these lead roles and she's doing very well there. I don't think she needs to do this. So he said, if Elizabeth Revill doesn't go, he said, I'm leaving. And I went and I won. So I was very lucky.
Yes, although I guess winning an award like that, such a prestigious award so early in your career, can also perhaps be a little bit of a hindrance and a bit of pressure on you, as I guess.
Well, it was all wonderful. I just loved it all. I loved the pressure. I loved the time. I didn't have time for a social life at all. I was so busy. But the nice thing about radio is you don't have to learn lines. But in the theatre, it's much, much harder, because, I mean, I learned my trade in, as Norman will know, in good old rep, where you're rehearsing one play and performing another. So you've got 2 lots of lines going around in your head, which... well, you know, I really, really loved. And it was a great treat when I went to Lancaster, I remember, when it was 4 weekly rep, and I was learning my lines within a week after having done weekly rep and fortnightly rep and learning them. And everyone was looking at me, why have you learned your lines so quickly? And I said, well, that's the way I am and the way I work.
Yeah, brilliant. So just going back onto your radio career, most people who know your name will know you from The Archers, which you had the privilege to be. And of course, The Archers isn't so much a drama series as an institution. Tell us a little bit about that. What character did you play? How long were you on The Archers? And any of the stories that you can tell us about?
I played a number of characters in The Archers. The main character I played, who was in it for just over a year, was a character called Angela Cooper, who ran the village shop and hairdressers. And she was a really flighty little piece and rolled in the hay with Tony Archer and God knows what else. But I developed quite a following with that. And it was quite funny because, you know, if you do get fan mail, the BBC can get it for you, and if they send out photographs and you sign them and this, that and the other. And I got sent my photograph off with a signature, and they got a letter back. And it said, you should be tall and dark with long, willowy black hair, and totally different. They'd imagined this persona that was nothing like me at all. And so I wrote back and I said, well, I'm sorry that the face disappointed you behind the voice, but you've got a little bubbly blonde and not a stunning exotic brunette. But that was good fun. I mean, on the first day, I blotted my copybook with some of them because I sat in Gwen Berryman's chair. I've never forgotten that, the embarrassment with that, because she always sat in the same chair. She wasn't too good on her legs. She played Doris Archer.
Right.
I soon learnt my place very, very quickly. But the amazing thing with the face behind the voice, the actor Bob Arnold, who played Tom Forrest, that I'd listened to as a child with my parents who used to listen to the Archers. And I'd imagined this handsome, tall, statuesque man with muscles. In waddled this little plump man with an enormous face. And then I heard his voice and I thought, oh my God, that's Tom Forrest. He was nothing like I imagined him, nothing at all.
Yeah.
And similarly, when things happened, some of the public, there was an appeal for the church roof, which I was involved in one of the series with it. And people were sending us money. They actually believed it. And we were having to send it to a proper charity, really crazy, really crazy.
Yeah. But you're right, it's fantastic. That's one of the great things about radio, isn't it? That you can, it leaves a lot more to the audience imagination, and
you can play anything on the radio if you've got the voice. And I played a huge variety of parts and so on. And I remember there's a form you have to fill in. You have to do a tape for the BBC with all the accents and dialects you can do. And I'm pretty good at those. But I put down the ones that I definitely could not do. One was Geordie. I mean, I can say 2 words and then I go all around the houses. And the other one was Norfolk. And then the next thing I know, Charles Lafoe had cast me as Little Emily in David Copperfield. And I thought, oh no, what do I do now? But there was a wonderful actor called Ted Kelsey, and he was playing Peggotty. And he used to spend some time with me before each scene, and we'd go through it together so that I had the right intonation and the right accent. I'm sure I couldn't do it now to save my life, but he did it and it worked and I managed it and it was great. And the most ridiculous thing I ever played on radio, I think, one of the directors discovered that I could make certain animal noises. And I also, in David Copperfield, ended up doing Jip the dog because it had a sense of humour and they couldn't find any tape recordings that were suitable. And I also did a cat in something else and a cow in something else. This all came from my father, who used to tell me stories about the farmyard when I was a little girl, and I used to imitate him.
All right. Well, I'll just bring in your first question that we've had. So somebody's asked a question about, which links in about motivation. Who inspired you to get into acting? You talked about probably it was maybe a lot to do with yourself and your own motivation, and who's inspired you throughout your career?
I saw well, there are a few actually, but I saw my first Shakespeare play at Stratford when I was 8 years old. My parents were going and I went on and on and on about how much I wanted to go too. And eventually, you won't like it, you won't understand a word of it. And it was Much Ado About Nothing. And no, I didn't understand a lot of it, but I understood the intonation and the expression and the action. And I fell in love with it. And I thought, this is what I want to do. And after that, I went regularly. And I remember being incredibly impressed with David Warner, who I saw him playing Richard II, I saw him playing Hamlet, and he was wonderful. And it was so sad that it was another accident that happened to him that took him out of the limelight, although he did reappear in films and things like this, but not to the same extent that he was before. But with regards to actresses, there were so many, but there was one in particular that I worked with when I was in Lancaster, and that was Harriet Walter. This was before she became well known. And I remember watching the way she worked, and we worked well together. And I was asked at an audition exactly that question. And they said, who do you most admire? And I said, Harriet Walter. And I told them why. And of course, they hadn't a clue who I was talking about, but look where she is now.
Absolutely, yes. You're obviously very perceptive, very perceptive. So in moving to television, so in terms of television, you played an awful lot of roles in a whole number of different series and one-offs. Looking back now, what do you see as your favourite role, the one that really sticks out in your mind as something you really enjoyed playing?
Well, there were two. There were the very first one I ever did, and again, this came from radio. They wanted someone who could do a Birmingham accent. And of course, I could turn Birmingham on and off like a tap. It was quite easy. It was no problem at all to speak like that. And it was in something called The Edwardians. And I was in a couple of scenes with the lovely actress Virginia McKenna. And I walked into the room. It was an episode called Daisy. And it was filled with all these people, that I'd seen, admired, Michael Hordern, John Bennett, and goodness knows how many others. I was staggered. So I sat very quietly in the corner and I listened and I watched. And she came over to me, Virginia McCain. She said, "And how are you getting on, Elizabeth?" And I said, "Oh, I'm learning ever such a lot." And she said, "Yes, so am I." And I thought, well, what a wonderful thing to say to a new juvenile actress just starting out and making her feel completely at home. And she was absolutely delightful.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, nowadays we know that there are a lot of very good women's parts written for, you know, strong, independent women, and, you know, rightly so. Was it the same back in the day when you were acting, or did you have to strive hard to find those sorts of roles of strong, independent women, or were there a lot of roles that you were offered which were supportive of men, if you like?
Usually the lion's share went to the men, but that's where working in repertory came into its own, and of course some of the commercial tours, on which one of them I actually met my husband. But definitely they opened up a whole spectrum for you, because when you were in a rep company, you had to be versatile. You had to be able to play any role. And so the variety of roles that you played was really fantastic. I mean, one week I'd be doing, say, Daphne Pink in Sailor Beware, and the next week I'd be the murderous Jacqueline de Severac in Murder on the Nile. But it was the repertory that really gave me my best grounding, I think, and a penchant to write, because let's face it, when you write, you are the writer, the director, the actor, you do the set, you do the costumes, you do the lot, all in your head. So it works, it translates really well.
Yeah, brilliant. And you talked about the fact that you started off probably in theatre. What's the bigger love for you? Did you prefer acting in television, or do you prefer acting in theatre?
I love the theatre. There's nothing like a live audience in front of you. And everybody will say the same, I think. You gauge your performance according to your audience, and you'll find that what works with one audience in one city won't work somewhere else. And it's different every night. And you have to be kept on your toes, because, I mean, obviously, occasionally you work with people who make slip-ups. I think the worst one I ever had was in Romeo and Juliet, working, I won't mention his name, but he has passed on, who couldn't remember the lines, and he used to keep drying up all the time, and he'd just catch hold of my hands and he'd go, and I thought, oh God, not again. So I would say his line as if it was mine and try and turn it round. I don't think I did the iambic pentameter any good, but at least we used to get through it.
No, quite. And you were very fond, I know from you were very fond of playing the role of the White Witch in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
That was great.
Were you a natural villainess?
Well, we did a Royal Command performance of that, and it was
wow.
the Duke of Gloucester. And at the end, when we were being presented to him, he said, "Did playing the White Witch make you feel like Margaret Thatcher?" I thought, well, yeah, possibly it did. But I did. I mean, I love playing villains and villainesses. I'm not I was never the sort of little ingenue, the little, you know, sort of sweet little girl in the corner. I always was a juvenile character actress more than anything else. But the White Witch was an absolute gift.
Yeah, I bet. And you didn't model little Margaret Thatcher then?
No.
Well, at least you wouldn't admit that, no.
I didn't even have my voice.
No, quite. So we could talk about this for hours, but obviously we're aware of the time. But so moving on from your acting career, you've moved into writing.
Yes.
Why the decision to move into writing?
Because I would have gone mad not being able to do something creative.
Right.
Yes, I was teaching and I loved the students and I put my heart and soul into that, but I had to have an outlet for me. And I'd always written ever since I was a little girl. I used to write stories for my cousins and entertain them and sing songs to them and all of this. And I thought, well, why don't I actually channel and do something? Originally, I wanted to be a children's author, but could never get anybody to read anything. So I tried, well, I'll try something adult. And it took off with a particular publisher, Edward Gaskell, and it went on from there. And I started writing for adults, but I'm not sort of confined to one genre. I do write historical, thriller, and I've even got a fantasy, but I'm, novel out, just one, but there we go. They're a huge variety.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention that. I mean, you're far too talented and far too multifaceted for those of us who don't share all the talents that you've got. Novels, plays, screenwriting, and as you said, you do different genres within the novel field. Which of those is your favourite, or do you just like the variety?
I really enjoy the variety, but I must admit I do have a penchant for the historical. I've got a historical series set pre-World War II and goes through World War II, set in Wales, where most of my family are. I've got World War II when set in Singapore, after having visited it and reading up so much about it. That's a completely different one. And of course, the one I'm doing with Norman and the riding officer, Nathaniel Brooks, in Against the Tide and The Turn of the Tide, which were highly acclaimed by the Historical Novel Society. But doing this Dreamtime of the Artful Dodger with Norman has been an absolute joy. And I do enjoy doing that kind of research. So much easier now with the internet. Before, I used to have to go down to the reference library and lock myself away with piles of books to try and find the information I wanted. But, Wikipedia and other things make it a much easier task.
Right. And one of our viewers has come in with an interesting question, to the extent of, has your acting helped you in your writing, and if so, in what way?
Oh, yes, most definitely. Because when I am writing something, I'm always thinking how I would play the part or the line, and I fall back on that. If I'm in doubt about something and I've got a character, because you hear the characters' voices in your heads and you know how they would react to something. Would he say that? Would he not say that? How would she respond if somebody did so and so or whatever? And it follows on from there. And I think having an acting background, particularly in theatre, has made a heck of a difference to my writing.
Yeah. And do you find it, because you write in so many different genres and different types, do you find it easy to switch between writing a novel to a screenplay, back to a play or whatever, or do you find that difficult?
No, that's fairly straightforward, because I will focus on the one. The only time I ever sort of stop and go back to something else, I usually have more than one project on the go, is if, and it doesn't happen very often, if I suddenly got stuck. And so then I would go on to a different project and I would start looking at that and ideas would come. And then I think, right, yeah, the juices are flowing now. And then I'd go back to the original. I would read back what I had written before and suddenly click, it would all happen. But fortunately, that hardly ever happens. Touch wood. It won't happen again.
No, brilliant. Well, we're going to move on and talk to Norman in a minute. I'd love to talk to you for longer, but as I say, time will be against us. But that's been really interesting. My final question for you is going to be, I probably will never get the chance to replace Lauren Laverne as the host of Desert Island Discs. So this is probably my only chance, or the closest I'll get. So I shall ask you the classic Desert Island Discs questions, if I may. So obviously at the end, she always says, you've gone to your island, so and you can take with you, apart from Shakespeare and the Bible, you can take your favourite book. So which book would you take with you to your desert island?
I think that would have to be a book by Tom Sharp called Wilt, which is the funniest thing I have ever read in my life. And when I was playing in rep at the Swan Theatre, I was actually staying at the director Patrick Macefield's house until I got somewhere to live, some digs. And I was upstairs in the bedroom and I was reading Wilt, and goodness knows what I was doing, because the kitchen was below and he and his wife Marcia at the time were in the kitchen. And I was laughing and the bed was going ka-thwang, ka-dong, ka-boom. And I got the strangest looks when I went downstairs. And eventually I had to get the book out and said, I've been reading this. And of course it went round the company like wildfire. And every time I lent the book, I never got it back and had to buy another copy. So I would take that and keep it all to myself.
Yes, writing humour and consistent humour throughout the book is a very great talent, isn't it? So
it is indeed.
I agree with your choice. So the next thing we'll allow you to take that. Right. You're also allowed to take a luxury item with you. What would be your luxury item on the desert island?
I think it would be, I was toying between a photo album and cosmetics. Because Photo album, yeah, because the photo album has all your memories, all the people you love, and is a kind of history in itself of your life. So I think I would take, yes, I'd take a photo album.
Take a photo album. Very, very good choice. And finally, they always say that, I mean, you haven't had the chance to choose 8 tracks, but I'm just going to restrict you to the one. So what's the one piece of music that if you were on the islands, you would save from the waves?
I think I would take Helen Reddy's Angie Baby, not just because it was one of my karaoke songs that I used to sing when people got me going and I'd had a glass of wine, but the whole story of it, which is fantasy, would make a wonderful sort of premise for a film, I think. But you can read so much into it. So yeah, I think I would pick Angie Baby.
Brilliant. Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. We'll come back to you in a little while, Liz. But we'll turn now to Norman. Welcome, Norman. Same first question to you. Where do you join us from tonight?
I'm in home. Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire, North Gloucestershire.
Ah, very nice. So we've all got southwest connections. That's excellent. You've been an actor since 1966, which is a really long time. So same question, I guess, as to Liz. What inspired you to get into acting?
I kind of didn't know I wanted to, but there was a teacher at my school called Bert Payne, who I never thanked, and I suppose this is a kind of way of thanking him now, but when I went to Bristol Grammar School, he cast me in a play at school, and I did it in the lower school. And then he cast me as in the Julius Caesar, and I played Brutus's wife Portia, which is awful when you're at an all-boys school. Came along, but he came to me one day, and he had the papers for the National Youth Theatre. So he said, sign those. So I signed them. And then I did an audition for them and I got into the National Youth Theatre. Funny enough, that's where I met Douglas Fielding, who was my best friend Les's old husband. And it was an extraordinary time for people in the youth theatre. There was Helen Mirren, Tim Dalton, I think Derek Jacobi was around. We didn't all meet. We just a bunch of kids in London running around doing a play. And then when I got back to Bristol, he started a Bristol Youth Theatre, okay. And he did a play called Peer Gynt, and I'm totally ignorant, or I was then. And he said, I want you to play Peer Gynt, and I said, is it a good part? And I did it, and he invited the Old Vic School to come and see it, and they offered me a scholarship. So I kind of didn't know I wanted to be an actor until I went there. And it was a wonderful thing going to the doors of the Old Vic School, because as soon as I saw these people with the same sort of ideas, I felt totally at home, and I loved it.
Yeah, but I noticed from your bio that you worked at a bank. Is that right?
I did during the period of just before I leaving the Old Vic School and leaving school and working in the bank. Before that, yes, and the youth theatre. Yeah, I'd worked at the bank for 18 months because my dad wanted me to. He didn't want me to be an actor.
Yes, I was going to say that because obviously Liz has shared that obviously her dad was very sensible and said, get your teaching qualifications and then try out the acting and we'll see where it goes. What was your parents' reaction to your desire to become an actor?
They weren't pleased. Dad didn't talk to me for an awful long time. What's really ironic about that is that when he died, just before he died, and I was, 30 odd then, he told me he'd always wanted to be an actor. Wow. But he wouldn't talk to me. Mum said, and then he said, well, you can stay with us at home, because it was only along the road. It was the Old Vic School in Bristol. And he said, but you've got to pay Mum 30 bob a week. So my £2 10 shillings grant, I had to pay Mum £1 10 shillings. And eventually they began to get used to it. But he said, you can only stay if you win the Best Actor award. I said, okay, so I did. I felt at home. It's what I wanted to do. And suddenly I realized that it was what I wanted to do. And I just, from leaving there, I had the most wonderful time.
Yes. And did you love theatre as much as Liz has expressed her love of theatre?
I did, but I was always scared of theatre. I mean, it got to the point I'd done an awful lot. I was getting to the point when I was doing A Midsummer Night's Dream in Regent's Park in London. I was playing Oberon, and I was being sick before I went on. And I thought, hang on, this is not good. But I still enjoyed it. And I mean, I love doing. I did a play called Same Time Next Year with Debbie Watling, and we toured it. I got the first touring production after Michael Crawford done in the West End, and we did it for 6 months, and it was such a joy to do it. And as Liz says, you get that immediate reaction from the audience, and you can play the tragedy. I mean, this wonderfully written play, and you're doing all the laughs, and suddenly in the middle of it, you say somebody's died, and to play that and hear the audience going down and absorbing the shock that you've given them, I just loved it. But I think my favourite was the sitcom in front of audiences. I mean, right. You had to learn a new technique. I mean, I was used to it, for instance, if I can see, yes, I can do it now. In the theatre, you have a laugh and you let the audience laugh, and then you come in like that. But for sitcom, because it's so tight, you give the line, they get the laugh, and you come in there. And it was a whole tighter, new process. And I think that marriage. I mean, also, if you went wrong, you could do a retake, which you can't do in the theatre.
No, quite. Did you ever lose the nerves, or were they always with you?
They were always with me. Always. Later on, yeah, they were always there. But I still liked it. I wonder sometimes why I was putting myself through it. But yeah, I mean, it's immediate. Yeah, I love theatre. I absolutely love theatre, and I've done an awful lot of it. And God, I did 3 Broadway plays before I was 22.
Wow. So was there a different experience in front of an American audience to an English audience?
I do remember hearing one of the Americans say, "How the hell do they learn all this garbage?" at one of the shows.
Yes, that's called a barbed compliment, I think.
But I remember we did Hamlet on. I was understudying Hamlet on Broadway, and Richard Pascoe was playing Hamlet, and it was a really good production of it. And I was playing Fortinbras, and I went to go on my first night, and they said, "You can't go on, the play's running too long." So they wouldn't let me go on my first night on Goodnight Sweet Prince, which did upset me slightly. But Sardis, the restaurant, had we booked to go in there, and they said they didn't really think they would. They would wait for the notices to come out. So we were allowed in the end, and we were put in a back room. Then the notices came out and said, "This is one of the best Hamlets ever to be on Broadway," and they asked us to go and join all the rest, and we told them to go forth.
Well, that's a new one on me. I've heard of people being filmed and having their bit cut out. I've never known somebody actually be in a play and have their bit cut out. That's really bad.
No, that's me going to finish the play, and boom, I was out, and I was out for the rest of the American tour. But when Europe after that, it was fine. I was back in. Then we got to Israel in 1967, 6-day war just after. But no, I love Shakespeare, and I just when people say, "Oh, I don't like Shakespeare," I say, "Have you been?" And sometimes they say no, so you say, "Well, go." And then other times they say, "Well, yes, but I didn't understand it." And I said, "Well, if you didn't understand it, that's the actor's fault.
Yeah.
You don't be able to understand this writer. I mean, he's just wonderful. The stories are just amazing, and I've been very lucky in being able to do quite a lot of it."
Yeah. Now I want to talk to you about. There's not many people. Very few actors will say their first film was with Orson Welles and Jean Morrow. So you have to tell us that story. So how did that come about, and what was that experience like?
Well, it was the last show we had at the show case at the Old Vic School, and I had an agent, and then I started working as an assistant stage manager or ASM at Bristol, and the phone went, and I don't suppose many people in their life have had somebody say this. I said yes to my agent. He said, "Orson Welles wants to see you in Madrid." Right? Pardon? He wants to see you in Madrid. So I'd done this audition some days before, not knowing what it was for. Anyway, I'd never flown before. Mum and Dad flew me to Heathrow. I got on a plane. I went to Madrid, and I was met by a little stretch limo. I mean, it wasn't a huge one, it was a little one, and driven to Wells's house. And I got there, and Paola, his wife, said, "I'm sorry, Norman." She said, "Orson's been out drinking with Joseph Cotton, and he's sleeping it off." got thrown out of a restaurant. So I'm thinking, hang on, I'm a lad from Bristol. What am I doing here? Joseph Cotton, Orson Welles. So she said, go and have a swim. So I went down, had a swim with his daughter, and I can't remember her name offhand, Beatrice. And then she said, you should better come up to the house now. So I went up to the house and sat in this room waiting. And then the door frame filled and this enormous man came in, oh, Norman, and I didn't know why I was there. Sat down, and I'd heard, one of his staff had told me he didn't like yes men. So he was saying all this rubbish, and I was going, yes. And I suddenly thought, I've got to say something about no. He said to me, well, what's on at this Bristol Old Vic at the moment? And I said, oh, it's played by Jean Ennui, and shit writer Ennui. No, he's not, I said. He said, I didn't know anything about Jean Ennui. So I said, well, I liked the facts I'd seen the play. It was Paul Beatos, and there was a play with, and he knew I was making it all up. And eventually he pushed a button on his desk, and the staff came in and he said, give the guy some dough, let him go see the town. So I went out with the kids. They said, you've got it. I said, got what? I don't know what this is about. Got what? Anyway, they took me out and they got me drunk. My plane was supposed to go back that day, but they put me on one for the next day. And a couple of days, people, my mum and dad, what was he like? And everyone was asking me at the Old Vic, and what were you there for? I don't know. And eventually a script arrived, and I looked at it. It was a four-handed script, and it was Orson Welles, Jean Moreau, a French actor called Roger Coggio, and me. And so eventually I went back to Paris. I had my hair dyed blonde, and they took me to this set out at a place called Malmaison. And my first day's professional work was In Bed with Jean Moreau, directed by Orson Welles.
Now that's something. That almost sounds the title of an autobiography, Norman.
My autobiography, because we get to the we get round to the thing later on. You probably will, of George and Mildred, which was The Ropers, and I think my title is going to be Money for Old Ropers.
Oh, brilliant. Well, let's talk briefly about that, because as you say, you're very well known as Geoffrey Fourmile, the I don't know whether it's obnoxious or lovable or a little bit in between of the next door neighbour to George and Mildred, but that was a huge sitcom at its time, but still is very popular today. So what's your experience of that? How do you remember those days?
I absolutely loved it, and I find a lot of people think, well, you know, you work with Orson Welles, you've done films with Mia Farrow and all that. Why are you doing British sitcoms? There's nothing snobby. I'm an entertainer, and when the jobs come along, I do them. And working with Uther and Brian and little Nicky, who I'm still in touch with, I was speaking to him yesterday on the phone. He's now 54, playing Tristram. It was one of the joys of my life. I'd been in Man About the House before, playing one part. Then they asked me to play Richard's brother. So I did that. And while we were doing that, Uther and Brian had asked for me to play their next door neighbour. So I went upstairs with the writers and the director, Peter Fraser-Jones, and he said, look, do you want to do it? And I said, I can't marry Paula Wilcox in one episode and then come back next door. He said, well, we'll put a moustache and glasses on you and just do a different voice. So I said, okay. And we did it, and we had so much fun. You're allowed to be an actor then. Now they want you to be, I don't know, they want you to have some experience of it, which when I played a serial killer killing 13 women, I don't think I've got much experience of that.
Well, one hopes not. I suppose we can't sort of leave your televisional career, and by great contrast, I guess, with George and Mildred was we talked to Liz about The Archers being a British institution. I guess I, Claudius, comes into the same category, and you played Marcus Vincius, I think, in that. What are your memories of that? Because so many great actors were in that. You know, it must have been a privilege to be a part of.
It was, absolutely. Let me just cut a tiny bit. Herbie Wise was the director, and I think for my money, he was one of the best television theatre directors. I only worked with him in television there has ever been. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. And I went and did a show at London Weekend. I can't remember. I think it was called Between the Wars. And Herbie came up to me and said, Norman, why are you playing such a small part in it? And I said, because I've never worked with you, Herbie. He said, oh. And he said, you'll get something. And the next day at my house, when scripts arrived, the postman rang the doorbell and this pile of scripts arrived. And it was a 6-parter called Vienna 1900. And it was a beautiful script with Robert Stevens Oh, all sorts of people. Dorothy Tewton, Christopher Guard, all sorts of people. And I read the first one, it was a smallish part, and I read the second one, which was called A Man of Honor, and I was on every single page. And I then became part of Herbie's repertoire of actors. Wow. And then when I Claudius came along, and Derek, God almighty, Derek Jaffrey, what an actor. I'm not going to say which part, it wasn't obviously Derek's, but I was asked to play a significant part in it, which would have been through all the episodes. And I couldn't because I was doing George and Mildred. So Herbie said, you're part of my repertoire, you've got to be in it. So he gave me this wonderful part of Marcus Vinicius. And I was in it with John Hurt. I had to kill John Hurt when he was playing Caligula, but it was such a wonderful, but it did give me one of the most terrifying things I've ever had to do, which was Derek had this huge long speech when he became, Caesar. I had one line at the end of it, and I thought, I've got to get this right, because if I muck this up, he's going to have to go back to the beginning and start again, and not forgetting about cut-ins and that. But it was an absolute joy. The people in that, it was just so great to be associated with. I'm such a privileged person.
Yeah. Well, I think anybody associated with that program would probably say the same. And a classic, an absolute classic of British television. Just to touch very briefly on a sadder part of your life, you had a very great, and as you say, privileged career, and then unfortunately you were involved in a very bad car accident, which changed things. How? I mean, it was obviously very significant. How did that impact on your career in life?
Well, luckily I was still working in both. I mean, George and Mildred didn't typecast me. Luckily, I was still doing loads of other things, and I went to France, and I'd driven most of the way through France, and then my mate, whose car it was, took over, and we hit a 38-ton lorry, and he pulled to the right, which was right because he was over there, but I got this lorry all over me, and I was pretty cut up. I had bust arms, bust ribs, shoulder, everything. It was all over the place. They cut me out the car, and none of it hurt, which is really weird. And then I realized I was looking at them trying to put my arm back together, and I thought, this has got to hurt. And as soon as you think it's going to hurt, it does. But the impact on my career was enormous. I tried to do a play when I came back, and I had to run away the first night. I used run away because I hate the word, but I did. I couldn't remember a line. And it wasn't until much later I found out that I had a thing called frontal lobe syndrome. Now, I can remember things from when I was a kid. I remember seeing my little sister stand for the first time. I can remember everything. I can't learn new things. And it really impacted. And I did the odd television. Luckily, my first television was Cadfael with Derek Jacobi again. And I did manage to get away with that because they knew about it. But that was the end of my career. I think I was given some charity parts by people. I did a little piece in One Foot in the Grave with wonderful Richard. And well, it was the end of my career, basically. And I didn't behave very well about it. Instead of thinking to myself, as Liz did, and getting herself a contingency thing, I unfortunately turned to the drink quite a bit, which we're through that now and have been for quite a while. But I sort of voiceovers I used to do a lot, but I haven't done so much here. But I have, if you think of a 76-year-old man doing heavy metal rock bands in Germany.
Good on you. Yes, I did notice that. That's a rather more unusual entry into your Wikipedia bits. We must move on because we need to talk about the book. But before I do want to ask the same question that I asked. So I'm casting you away like I cast Liz away to the desert island. So on that basis, what book are you taking along with your Shakespeare and the Bible?
Well, this actually is a strange book, but I do think it's a relatively modern Roman adventure, and it's wonderful. It's The Godfather, Mary Peter. It's so many ways of looking at it. It's a wonderfully, wonderfully written book, and it really takes you. It is like the Caesars to me. It's wonderful.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, and a great contrast to Liz's book. So if you both cast off together, you could swap because you'll have a great contrast in reading material. What luxury item would you take?
Picture of Rachel, my wife.
Perfect. And finally, the favourite record that you would say from the Waves?
Robin Gibb, I Started a Joke. It's a wonderful, wonderful, and it just emphasises his voice so beautifully. It's a lovely. I started a joke. I can't sing.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. We've had another viewer's question, which I'll put to you, and then Liz also can answer that. What advice would you give to anybody starting off in their acting profession that you've learned through your many, many years of experience?
Don't bother about being famous. There are too many people trying to be famous with no talent. Learn your trade.
Very good. And if I can ask the same question to you, Liz?
I would say never give up. Always try, because the only people who fail are the ones that give up. So always try and follow your heart and your dreams and persevere, because it's a hard world out there and you'll get loads of rejection, but there will be somebody that will say, yes, I want this person, and it will go on from that.
Brilliant. Excellent advice. Thank you very much. Now, that was really interesting from both of you. Thank you so much for sharing so openly about your life and careers. We'll move on to talk about this book now, which you've collaborated on, and very interesting collaboration. Or we think of collaboration often in terms of TV script writing, for instance, but not so common in writing a novel. So, how did it all come about then?
Well, I'll start it, Liz, if that's all right. I just had this. I was talking to Mark Lester, who played Oliver in the musical film, and we were talking about the various actors through time that had played the Artful Dodger and what had happened to them, etc. And then I began to think, well, what happened to the Artful Dodger, the young man? Then I went back and read the end of Oliver Twist, and it is pretty certain that he was transported for stealing a silver snuff box. So I thought, well, I know all about transportation, and I started looking it up, and I knew nothing. I was totally into the horrors of it.
Right.
I thought I knew what happened to them in Australia, and I knew nothing about that. And it began to sort of really, I wanted to share what I'd read with other people. And I'm quite good at dialogue. So I started writing a screenplay. And then it sort of, I was putting a fictional character into real situations. Eventually there's a thing with him and this lad, Edward, the gold rush in 1851 in Bathurst. All sorts of things like that. And then I finished it, and I finished it exactly as I wanted it to, which had to do with the Aboriginals, and Dreamtime is what the Aboriginals call life. So it's the Dreamtime of the Dodger.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get it read. Nobody would read it. And then one day an actor, a friend of mine, Clive Mantle, said, try David Parfitt at Trademark Films. So I looked up David, I thought another no coming, and he was a child actor. And he was in a thing called Mother Makes 3, Mother Makes 5 with Wendy Craig. Well, I went in and guested in one of those. So I wrote to him and he said, my dear, please send me your stuff. It's that awful thing that people have now, unless you know somebody in however tenuous a link. Anyway, he then saw it and said, I suggest you turn it into a book. It could be a 6-part series. And then, because I'd met Liz at Dougie Fielding's funeral, there's a fated thing about this. And that was the first time we'd met, my best friend and her husband. It went to her, she'd already read it as a script, and I'll let Liz take over from there, please.
So I was going to say, Liz, that's quite a responsibility. Somebody else has written a screenplay, their love, they've put a lot of heart and soul into it, and then they pass it over to you to convert it into a novel. How did you approach that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. He handed me his baby, but I was so excited about the concept. I absolutely loved it. And I thought I could do something with this. I could really run with it. So I used Norman's screenplay as a base, and I expanded it. And Norman, bless his heart, allowed me free rein to develop new characters and subplots. And so his screenplay suddenly turned into this 153,000 word novel, which is the longest thing I've ever written, but I loved every minute of it. I enjoyed doing the research, and it worked well between us, because I would write it just a chapter at a time, And then I would send that chapter to Norman while I got on with the second chapter. He would digest it. Then he'd get on the phone to me and we'd have a chat about it. And he'd say, well, there's a word you use there and it's a little bit too modern. I think we need to find something else. I said, right, fine, okay. But that didn't happen very often at all. That was, it was something we were just so in tune with each other and right on the same page that it went like a dream. It really did. The time went really quickly. And I was thrilled to do it and I loved doing it. And we worked well together like that, didn't we? Conversations and emails.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that. So you basically, as you say, you both loved the process. There was never any need to bring in a third party to act as arbitrator in anything.
No, not at all. We didn't. I mean, there were a couple of things that I didn't. And Norman said, "Well, I think it'd be more dramatic if we did so and so." And I said, "Well, yeah, okay, I'll do that." I think one thing that I brought in, and he said, "Oh, I don't know whether we need so much of that." And I said, "You do, because this is a very important part of Jack's life." And then Norman thought about it and said, "Yes, you're quite right. Go ahead with the wedding dress," which is part of the book later on. But yes, it worked, and I am amazed that because I've never collaborated on a novel before. On screenplays I have, but never on a novel. It's such a solitary occupation usually, but it worked very well.
So give people. Oh, sorry, no, you go on.
I was just going to say, David Parfitt at one point, he said, look, I think you should go far more into the Aboriginals' lives because that's part of the story and not using it enough. I told Liz and she'd already done it.
Yeah. Well, we'll come on to that because that's an interesting part of it. But just for those benefits of people watching this who've obviously not had contact with the book so far, just give it a little précis of what it's about. What's it exploring?
It follows the life of Jack Dawkins from prison, transported to Australia, his escape, and what happens to him in the harshest of conditions. And it is filled with murder, revenge, kidnap, and all sorts of retribution. But throughout it all, Jack maintains this wonderful charm, cheekiness, his lopsided smile, and it works out. I'll let Norman talk about how we came to the end, which is very important. There's a lovely lady she's 95, and when she read it, she loved it, and she said that the last page gave me such hope, and she shed a tear. And she's not the only one to say that, is she, Norman?
She's not, and there was a lady here, a teacher called Tracy, and she just wrote to me and she said, reading the last page, again, it brings you hope. And I do, please, if you buy it, don't read the last page before you get there. It's really the change of the whole book. It really does change it all around. But it was a joy working with you, Liz.
With you too, Norman. And it'd be nice to do it again sometime with something else, maybe.
Well, somebody has actually asked that. Somebody has asked that very question. Whether you've, having had such a successful collaboration on one novel, are there any plans to do another?
Well, not for me, because I'm not a writer. I mean, it was lovely to hear you call me an author at the beginning, Richard. I think this is just, that thing they say everybody's got a book in them. This was mine.
Right.
But it's I don't know. I don't know. If something really kicks me, it was the whole thing of the Artful Dodger got into my head, and I wanted to put it on. I wanted to share the experience, and if that's what writing is, maybe if I find something else, then maybe they'll do that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that although no one might not feel able to collaborate on a novel, which I can understand the difficulties there may be a possibility that we could do a screenplay, which he's already said he has a penchant for dialogue, and we've got plenty of ideas between us. So we'll see how this goes, and then maybe we might take pen to paper and emails and phone calls again and see what we can come up with. You never know. Never say never.
Never say never. It's one of the great things about you book, and I've read it, and it's fabulous. One of the great things about it is the research, and the book feels very authentic, and you know, you're two English people writing about Australian history, and quite a sensitive time in Australian history. So just explain to me how you went about the research.
Well, for me, I'll start with, I did the transportation and using like the Hulk, as they did with Magwitch and Great Expectations. But I looked it all up and I couldn't believe it. Port Arthur, when you get there to Australia, was the same. And I didn't go into the Aboriginals as much as Liz did. But what I did do, and this threw me sideways, my wife Rachel found a passage in one of her books. And if you think that the Europeans didn't go to Australia till 1600, 17th century, and the Aboriginals have believed all their lives this story. God made a man and he gave him a wife. He gave them the most beautiful garden to live in and they wanted for nothing. The only thing they were not allowed to do was to take the honey from this particular tree. And one day the wife was tempted. She took the honey from the tree and brought death to the world. That just blows my mind. They've believed that for thousands of years. And it's the same story. Swap apple and honey, and you've got the same story. That blows my mind. But Rachel found that. But Liz has done much more research than I have.
So Liz, how did you go about it?
Well, I mean, Norman sent me a book on convict transportation, and I'd done some research too. So that was sort of combined. And similarly, I found the same story that Rachel found. But the most difficult thing I found was the Awabakal Aboriginal language, which was in use in the Port Jackson area at that time, which is now totally obsolete. Eventually, I found a dictionary with sort of 500 words, none of the words that I wanted to use. I managed to get over that by using other Aboriginal languages from that area and introducing those, but it wasn't all strictly Awabakal because it couldn't be done. But the amount I've learned was incredible. I mean, I've been to Australia, I spent 3 months there, and I went to sort of the Aboriginal villages and so on and had a very entertaining time. And then we were stunned at the end with what the white man had done to the Aboriginals, which really made me feel so ashamed. I just couldn't believe what they'd had. So I delved much, much further into the Aboriginal customs. Also, the convict jargon and the slang of the time, which is totally different from ours, and trying to find the right words to use. For example, I mean, if somebody's pregnant today, you'd say they've got a bun in the oven, or they've been knocked up, or they're preggers, or whatever. And none of those were appropriate at all for that time in Australia. I had great fun trying to find one. I eventually found one where it was regarded as harbouring a fugitive, was the expression, because I was trying to describe somebody who was very, very fat and afraid of getting a belly like a pork. It looks as if I'm harbouring a fugitive. I just hope people will understand all of those references. But it was a joy to research, and I learned so much with their customs. They don't have a word for please. They don't have a word for thank you. You are not allowed to mention the name of a person who has died. They have particular ceremonies. I mean, Norman went into this, which led me to research that further, where they will open all the doors of the house and burn sage and other aromatic things to drift through the house in order to cleanse it and ward off evil. So much, wasn't there? That started with you, and then I researched it some more. That was really, really interesting. Yes. So, and sheep shearing and delivering lambs and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, but what's lovely is that reading it, often if you're writing about a part of the world which maybe you're not quite so familiar with, it's interesting that you went there for 3 months. It's the senses that you forget: the taste, the sound, the smells, etc., and that comes through very vividly in this book.
That's the most important thing for a writer. It's not just to say, oh, it's a nice sunny day. You have to really put yourself in there. It employs all of the senses, just like you're saying, Richard. It really is important to do that.
Yeah, and your love of history certainly comes through, Liz, in this. So if we can't, if the Great British Public can't persuade you to collaborate, let's talk about your immediate future that you plan to do. So first, you, Norman, if you're not going to, because I think you are an author. Don't be modest. I think you are. If you're not going to, or are you going to be inspired as you were with this one to write another screenplay? Do you think?
I don't know. We're sort of talking with a couple of film television companies at the moment. We might have to turn it into 6 one-hour screenplays, but that's slightly well, no, it's not too bad. We're talking to 2 companies, so I'm just waiting to see what happens.
Oh,
but I have plans. Just carry on and be happy. I keep toying with the idea of doing my autobiography because
I think you should.
Yes.
I really think you should. I think just on the basis of this hour that we've spent together, there's so many, and I'm sure we've only scratched the surface of the stories that you've got. And I think there's, I think it would be very popular. So I would certainly urge you to do that.
Thank you, Richard. And Richard, I'm so glad you've read the book. I really am, because I'm glad you read it, because you're talking from an enlightened position.
Well, and I say, I mean, I'm not being paid, and you're not giving me commission to be polite and nice about it. It's genuinely a great read, and anybody who hasn't got it, I'd very much urge them. And as I think you said in the interview on Radio Cornwall, Norman, that's 46 very positive reviews on that website, which we probably shouldn't name. It's named after a South American river. I think we can. I think that speaks for itself. So for you, Liz, I mean, you've probably got several different things on the go already. What's the next big project we can expect from you?
Well, I'm halfway through the 6th in my DC Allison thriller series,
right?
Which is set in Birmingham. Although previous ones in the series have ventured into Devon and Cornwall, and I'm halfway through that. And I'm proofreading my first children's book,
wow,
which is illustrated, to get that back to the publisher. It's been proofread once, and I'm horrified to find that I found 19 mistakes in it already, which is not good, considering I paid for it to be proofread. But that will be quite exciting. So I'm looking forward to that, and that's called The Secret of Eden. And my DCI Allison one will be called Bodies. Every title is in that series is a song title, but there is a reason for that, and you'd have to start at the beginning and go through to find out why.
Yeah. Well, it's past 8 o'clock. We've had our hour together, and speaking personally, it's been a real pleasure to speak to both of you. Very interesting. I can spare your blushes, not just the fact that you have very interesting lives, but you're very engaging people. And it's been really lovely to talk to you. I guess the final question I'd ask is that you both agreed to do this on behalf of Emmaus Cornwall. Why was that important for you? Why did you, so wish to support us in this way?
Well, because it goes further than just helping on a nightly basis. It helps, it gives them purpose, moves them forward. I think it's a wonderful charity. And as I did on my promotion for it, I have a choice. And the most important thing in life is choice. A lot of people don't have that. Emmaus can do that.
Yeah, brilliant. And you, Liz?
Well, I'd never heard of Emmaus, and it was through meeting and getting to know Sue Truella, who is now a very good friend, and she explained the premise behind it, and I just thought it was wonderful, because it's not just a soup kitchen, like Norman says. You're setting them up for life to prepare them for the world of work and giving them a helping hand and watching them go through, and I think that is fantastic, and anything as good as that must be supported.
Well, on behalf of my fellow trustees and Sue as chair, as you say, thank you both very, very much for giving up your time. As I say, it's been a fascinating evening, and I You must go away right and stop at the moment doing your draft notes for your autobiography, Norman, because it will be fascinating. And I look very much forward to reading your next book, Liz. And I'm sure your prodigious output will continue unabated. But on behalf of everybody watching, can I thank you both very much indeed. And to those who have been viewing this online Emmaus conversation, again, thank you for joining. Thank you for supporting our cause. If you haven't already signed up to receive regular information about Emmaus Cornwall, please contact us through the website and we'll send you some information. And we very much hope we'll have another Emmaus conversation very soon. And we very much hope, if we do so, that you will join us. So thank you to Norman, thank you to Liz, thank you to all, and a very good night to you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.